Thank you for showing up. This session is around fiber futures and the power of fiber optic connectivity and what it's done. We have three panelists. A fourth one should join us shortly. I think he just ran to the bathroom. But I wanted to pull this panel together to talk a little bit about how these folks are using fiber for their organizations, for their constituents. We have somebody representing a town, somebody representing our municipality, somebody representing our school district, Doug Casey, who will be back momentarily, kind of tying it together with how the CEN leverages this infrastructure to tie schools together, communities together. And then we have Elin Katz from the Consumer Counsel to kind of tie it together and expand upon that, and work a little bit tying the GIG CT project, if you've heard about that, and how that kind of fits into this. So kind of from the ground level all the way up, with that, maybe I'll pass off to Rick and let Rick introduce himself. And if each of you could kind of give a little bit about how you're using fiber in your organization, how it benefits the mission of your organization, and what you hope to do with it in the future. You want to stand? Yeah.
My name is Rick Bazzano, the IT manager for the town of Simsbury. We're in the fiber realm for the past 2.5 years. It was money that we got in part with the CROG project, which is a regional relation that came out 2 years ago. And we jumped on that. We got some money to start us on that project. And pretty much simply, it was really to run the main corridor of the town. The major objective was really to tie in all our municipal buildings that are around that corridor, and as well as to attach to the educational system, which Jason Casey will talk about as well. So in Simsbury, we're pretty much a shared town. We've been that way for the last 20 years. And really what we're trying to do now, after our plant is pretty robust now, is really what kind of services can we throw over that line, sharing community, residents, for educational purposes.
I'm Jason Casey, I'm the Director of Systems Technology for Simsbury Public Schools. And when I first arrived at the school district, all of the schools were connected by T1 line. In that time, we originally looked at what we could connect with dark fiber, and then from there moved into areas where we would put leased fiber if we couldn't afford the dark originally. But at this point, as of right now, we're in the process of finishing our last fiber connection. So by the end of this year, all of our schools will have a 12-strand fiber connection back to the high school where the CEN connection is. So some of the great things that's afforded us, on top of obviously the significantly faster bandwidth, is also things like dedicating network paths for things like backup, for instance. So I can have a replicated storage area network device at one location, having real-time backup during the day. It doesn't really impact anything because the bandwidth is completely separate. So that's how we do it.
Good afternoon, I'm Elin Katz. I'm the Consumer Counsel for the state of Connecticut. If you're wondering what that means, my mother does too, so I have to explain it to her every time. I am the ratepayer advocate for energy, natural gas, water, and telecommunications. I'm head of a very small independent state agency that is, my job is to bring the public's voice to the table. I'm also head of the state broadband office, which was created last year. And if the budget's been voted on, has been funded again this year. So we're very excited. I'm one of the leaders of the CT GIG project, which is an effort at the municipal level to develop models for increasing deployment of fiber to community anchor institutions, to business areas, and ultimately fiber to the home. And I know from working, particularly during the storms when we spent a lot of time in Simsbury actually, when your citizens want something, they tend to call town hall. You know, why is the power out? Why is my service so lousy? You know, why can't I get better internet service? So I've realized through this position that one of the best ways to get an understanding of what citizens need and are looking for is to work at the municipal level, and there's just been a tremendous response from municipalities who are saying, yes, you know, our citizens, they want more speed, they want it now, and if we're going to invest in infrastructure, we're most interested in investing in fiber. So that's sort of been the driver for the dialogue that's been going on for the last couple of years, really, around municipal models for developing fiber networks and making sure we're not just creating 169 thoughts and models, but trying to create something that's more of a coherent whole that will work together as municipalities roll out and invest in additional speed for their citizens.
And I'm Doug Casey, a Casey in Simsbury, but no relation to Jason. I don't think we've ever run into each other in a Starbucks or anything yet, so that'll happen someday. As Mark mentioned, I serve as the Executive Director for the State's Commission for Educational Technology, and so really kind of looking at education broad-based, so in almost maybe take education, sounds so institutional, it's an activity, it's not necessarily a place. We've got our schools, but think about learning, right? So think about how key broadband is to learning. Libraries, adult education, of course K through 12, but you know, how many people in our town alone are getting master's degrees or certifications online? So there's learning going on all the time, 24/7. And I think about, when we think about the context of broadband, you know, Connecticut has got sort of high marks right now for current levels of connectivity, depending on whose data you look at. 87 to 97% of our schools are at or above the recommended level of connectivity. But when you talk to technology directors and folks who are in classrooms, for example, you see a guess or an estimate that those demands are going to increase anywhere from 2 to 5-fold. And if we're looking at an increase in bandwidth usage of 50% over last year alone, we see where the trend is. So we can't rest on our laurels, and we really have to be thinking about leveraging broadband for the future of learning everywhere.
So I don't have any questions really prepared for this panel, but I really want to open you up to the floor. You've got 4 different experts here from the school, the municipal level, state level, to really share their experiences of building out these infrastructures, how it's supported each of their organizations. So I really want to open you up to the floor and let you guys pick their brains. I'll give you a few seconds to come up and who's going to ask the first question. I'm happy to pass around the mic. And
when building your municipal network, I think you said you had leased connections as well, fiber connections. Did you break those leases once that network was built? Because we unfortunately have 20-year leases that we're halfway through with fiber tech, but we're looking to build out our own network, municipal and school, and that's the question mark I have right now is, what do I do with those?
Sure. Build on this side. Yeah, initially, when we started looking at our T1 lines, the low-hanging fruit was any school that was physically, geographically close to the high school that had the CEN connection. For our schools that were kind of geographic outliers, we got into these leases. And what we've had to do is essentially time our dark fiber rollouts. I know this isn't the answer you want to hear. We had to time the dark fiber rollouts to when the leases were expiring. We were lucky in that our lease providers offered us, once those leases expired, the ability to go into a month-to-month payment plan from that point on. So we weren't under the gun to have the cutover ready to go at the moment that it was over. But ultimately, yeah, we did have to wait for the lease to expire.
Thanks, Scott. Once again, I'm Bill Valley, the broadband policy coordinator with Elin, Katz at the State Broadband Office. I'd like to repeat the question I asked earlier in the previous panel, which is, it's great to hear from a town. Of course, Elin represents the state, but could you speak to what ways you find regionalization or sharing with other towns would be beneficial to the town of Simsbury, or could it increase your productivity, therefore perhaps reduce your expenses in a time when that's kind of a big deal? Do you do that? Do you wish you were doing it? And if so, what would you do?
I was just saying, me. I have an answer for this one. I think one thing that jumps out at me as an IT director for the school district is how similar Simsbury is to all of the neighboring towns in some of the shared kinds of software platforms that we use. A vast majority are using PowerSchool for student data management. A vast majority are using Snap for health management services. A vast majority are, I mean, it goes on and on. There tends to be a star provider in each category, and certainly there's competition in these spaces, but what you kind of find out is this 80-20 rule of 80% are using this particular thing and 20 the other. It seems to me that a great place for the state to be moving would be to consolidate these kinds of things, much in the way that bigger states, I understand, are doing. If you look at Louisiana with gigantic parishes of schools, the kind of licensing deals they're getting per student from, say, Pearson, or, I'm sorry, whoever owns PowerSchool now, the kinds of licensing deals that they're getting from these providers are significantly better than what Simsbury can get out of that. So I think if we were to combine our town's software needs, that would be one piece of low-hanging fruit for a consolidated network to go in as a consortium and buy those things.
I would just echo what Jason said. I think there's, that's just sort of appeared underneath us as over time you found folks who naturally, organically work together, they talk together. I mean, I'm looking at technology directors from across the state in the audience too. You know, there's this, it's the Connecticut way. It's not necessarily top down, but it tends to be bottom up when people just come in together saying, what do you use? We use this. So it's sort of come up from the surface, and why not just take advantage of that? So it's actually one of the key areas of opportunity that we're looking at when we're taking steps to put some solutions in place, because it's just logical.
What other questions do you have for this group?
So on the government side, how we look at it too is when we connect it to our school district, they have their set of needs, which are very important, take a high priority in our community, just like it does in yours. For us, we're looking at it to expand all our applications and everything else. But our key point 2 years ago was really to get into CEN and to be a member of CEN. Within the next 5 years, there's probably going to be, if you sat in the last session, there's going to be those applications that are going to be hosted that really we're all going to participate in, whether it be the dog licensing program or a QDS application that's out there for assessors or for town clerks. I think that's the way to go in the future. So the town to participate in a fiber project is very important, and that's why we jumped in it. But when we jumped in it, we went accordingly with the education community that we have, because it's taxpayer money. And wherever we went, they were with us. And so town hall, police, we're all hardware connected to the same thing. We're protected, obviously, we're segmented. But outside of it, one more school, right? We have one more school, and pretty much the whole town is fibered up for us. And we did it with, being very cost conscious, just like Jason said about with the leases on the dark fiber. One of those things came up when we were laying out our fiber. Jason came up to me and says, hey, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, you know what? By the time we get the capital improvement to run the fiber to the high school and connect all these old buildings, it'll be two years out. You'll have a year and a half left. Just see if you can get a negotiation. He took care of that piece, and it was a win-win for us all. So we saved that money, and they're saving us money as well. Another point that came out a year and a half ago, the town made a survey, and in the survey we had this meeting, and what are we going to ask our residents? And I stood up at the end and I said, you know what, we should have one, and this is an influence from Elin and from Bill, is that we should ask our residents if we had to raise their taxes a certain amount of money, little, would they pay for cheap internet services? And this was like, that was question 37 out of 40. Obviously, they leave it to the end. But it was overall surprised that like 37% of those folks said that they would take a tax hit just to have high-speed internet to their house. So we're in a position too, as Elin and Bill move on in their crusade, to take neighborhoods close to our main thoroughfares and really just try it as a pilot. It really is not a big dollar money, and there are some private-public partnerships that are already beginning to show up, and Simsbury is willing to do that. And even from an education standpoint, that's a win-win, because now we're tying them and that community in to some type of distance learning or classroom learning as well. So that's what we're looking at.
Could you just follow up, Rick?
Yeah.
You got the mic. No, you just.
You sure?
I'm a baller.
Yes, he is.
Yes. Sorry, George. But do you find that there are software things that you, CIO, can share with other towns either through the CCAT and CROG, or just can you foresee yourself being in a position?
Some discussions we had with GMIS. I don't know if you folks know what the GMIS organization is. I know, like, looking in the crowd, there are some folks. It's a bunch of IT managers that are from towns specifically, but once a town joins, the education side is also a partner as well. They don't have to pay extra. But there's things like the dog license was one that we talked with Scott and with Jack in Manchester. We're just put, a SQL database out there as a trial and do it. And the point is that what happened there at that point, CEN wasn't ready for us, but it's come to a point now where CEN is ready for us, because we were attacking, poor Ray and poor Scott. It's like, well, we want to do, border gateway protocols because we want to get our data across your lines to another town hall. So it's really, Bill, to answer your question, it could be anything. I mean, Jack, we just jumped to SimpliVity, which is a hyper-converged technology. And it consists of really 2 appliances. And that third appliance is a disaster recovery. Right now, it's 2 miles away in Jason's data center for recovery. But we have residents in town think that that is too close of a location to town hall should something happen. But now with CEN, in the way it's revolving, I can take that appliance and put it in Plainville, or I could put it in Manchester, and if something did happen, I could spin that up, and I'm working there. So things like that are always there. Creativity, I guess.
I just want to tell you a story that something that happened to me this morning that relates to this idea of where we need to go and what do we need to do to meet the next generation's needs, which is I went to Starbucks and ordered my, my $4.52 latte, which put aside that point. And I gave the woman $5, and she said, oh, do you have any change? So I said, oh yeah, and I said, here's 2 quarters, and I'm digging around, and I have a couple of pennies, and I, found them, and I looked behind me, and there's a line of millennials all impatiently tapping their debit cards. And I thought, wow, money's really quaint right now. And me and my pennies, I'm actually becoming my grandmother. So, the title of this is Fiber Futures, and I think that's sort of, the next generation they're not going to have any patience for, or understanding of, why are we taking so long to do this? My kids are like, why do you carry change anymore? Why do you carry, it's all, use the debit card. And I think I have 2 kids, 2 sons are graduating from high school this year. I have twins, and they're going to go to a college campus, and they're going to have a fabulous network like CEN, and then they're going to graduate, and they're going to expect that they're going to be able to go live in an apartment that has the same kind of connectivity that they have at the UConn dorms, and they're going to expect that when they're walking to the train or calling Uber or getting in their Google car, that they're going to be able to connect the whole way through. And we're not there yet. And I think, to me, one of the challenges that I put to this group, and one of the things I feel that's my job as an advocate, I always say to Bill, you know, we don't have anything, all we can do is talk. But, you know, we're trying to create, and I think there has become a much larger conversation about what is the vision that we are heading to. And I believe it's fiber. I think anyone in this industry thinks eventually we are going to be dependent on fiber for the delivery of internet, and we're going to have over-the-top services. You know, it's pretty hard to find a 25-year-old who has a cable bill. They watch Netflix and they watch whatever they watch, and they don't watch the local news. And so I guess I have a challenge to this group, and you can challenge me back, which is how do we collectively articulate and formulate what is our vision for the future? If we all assume, since you're sitting in a room about fiber futures, that it is that we need to get to a fiber world for ourselves and for our kids, well then we sort of need to, I think, own that and then work backwards and say what are the steps we need to do to get there. And one of them, getting right down to the point you were making, which is developing public understanding and community engagement around this issue. And I just want to share with you one thing that the city of Danbury recently did towards this end. It's similar to what you were doing with, it sounds like a ballot initiative or some question, which is they're looking at, you know, considering a potential fiber build, I think fiber to the home. And they said, well, I wonder how our citizens are coming from, where they feel about this. So they did a robocall, actually, and I think what they offered was similar question. Would you be interested in paying a little bit more on your tax bill if you got a corresponding savings on your telecom bill, really a multiplier, right? Maybe you pay $15 more a month, but maybe you save potentially $30 or $45. Would you be interested? Do you want the city to continue to consider that model? And what Danbury found through their robocall was they got a 73% positive response. So I think we are moving towards more of a collective understanding. But I guess if I have questions in the audience is, how do we continue to drive the conversation and the understanding and the acceptance around the idea that we need to move in a certain direction with respect to our future and the telecom world that we want to see? How do we help achieve that, and how do I, as your advocate, help you bring that message, if in fact you believe, as I do, that is, we are heading towards the fiber future?
Isn't there a challenge to that, again, the last mile when it comes to college? The model today is, you know, your building code makes you run electrical wire a certain way. But on the telecommunications side, it's a crapshoot. It's whatever, you know, is competitively in the market. I mean, the only way, if your 169 towns get together and say, we're going to make everybody run fiber when they build a new house, just like they do electricity to the house, then we might solve that. But the costs there for the builders would be, you know, astronomical. So I think that the other side is content on the network. We talk about kids not being on television and things like that. So we got to bring content to the spaces that they are in. So if a network like this allows us to create content centers in the state, we can push out information, and it's coming to them on their phones, it's coming to them on their high-speed connections in different ways, whether that's at home, school, or work. It's sort of, you know, one direction. I mean, is the state thinking, and remember the old interconnect for cable, and how you could play a videotape in Shelton and it could go all over the state in one shot? Are we thinking that way in terms of the way this fiber is connected? I've heard a lot of talk about programs and things, but how about programming that's on the network that can be used in what we would call traditional ways, but to non-traditional receivers?
I don't have an answer for that, but maybe you do. It's a great point.
Yeah.
And you know, I will just say that, you know, our vision, and our pitch, for lack of better words, this is an incremental process. You know, we're not going to start today and have fiber to home in 5 years. But do we all want to get to fiber to the home within some period of time? So therefore, do we start with our community anchor institutions and our schools, which I think we're starting to make progress on? Do we start reaching businesses with higher speeds, and who are the providers that are willing to do that? And then the question of content is, that's a whole nother layer, but I saw a hand up there, so maybe there's...
Well, I think it's also, you asked the question of what people should know, and I think the thing that people should understand is this network is very different than the networks of Comcast and Frontier, and that this is it should be an open network where there's competition or differentiation of what you're providing on the network. I can be a B2B business. I don't want to work with residents, but I'm on this network. I can be a residential business. The Google Fibers could come in and we share this network. I think that, democratizing of that network and why municipalities are involved, I think that needs to be understood. Not just, you'll get, that competition comes. Because I think many of us see our Comcast bill, January went up 10%. I got nothing to do. But even if I want that new box, I've got to call it, they don't just bring it to you. But, it's those things that I think, we all somehow lost our monopoly rights in our towns just because of AT&T putting in UVerse somehow changed that. So I think the towns that nobody knows, so it's more informational things need to be aware. People understand in their towns that those things, I think that part is important.
I think there's a little bit. I love the question. One of the things I like to think about is when we talk about millennials and they're changing and taking over and being the natives with what we're talking about as opposed to the refugees or the older folks. I think what they do and what is happening with social media and the internet is collaboration. And to your point, I think the way they collaborate is that they're drawing content, information, knowledge from their peers, from everyone. And we are with the state, lots of town people here, and there's a command and control idea that I all grew up with, which was there was the book, there was the president, there was the mayor, and that person in conjunction with a little legislative group said, this is what we're going to do. And they just put forth, this is what we're going to do, and we all said, okay. Now, when they put out the word, it comes back and bites them. It's like, no, you're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. And it's that's really, I think, the dynamic. And so, I think to your point, which was, they're in all these different, they're in the phone, and they're in texting, and not having cable things. That is part of that whole, the tide is rising. And so we have found in our years now of talking to municipalities and the state, trying to make something happen, just gin up some excitement, the tide has risen. And now what we hear when we go to a town isn't, well, gee, what is this broadband thing? It's really, well, how do I get it? How do I finance it? What do I do? And, do I have to have a server in the basement and all that stuff? So the dialogue is rising, and this collaboration thing is just ginning up. And look at the presidential thing, it's the 140 characters.
A question about impediments to adoption, and if there are any towns in the state or any development authority programs already in action that look to mimic what Cleveland did in their health tech corridor, where they took 100 gig fiber between Case Western and their local PBS station, plug for CPTV, and created a health tech corridor where they have 100 gig fiber, but they also created a community organization to help push forward that objective, a nonprofit just solely devoted towards promoting development technology companies in that 2-mile square space. And if we're pushing towards any similar such locations or creating development authorities to help spur a project of development like that.
Well, this is one of those things that I have good news, and it's hot off the presses, which is Senate Bill 445, which was just passed, championed by Senator Hartley, who was here this morning, and Polly Painter who's here from the Senate as well. And this is creating a task force to come up with a plan to create a ultra-high-speed network to address the needs of specifically bioscience, healthcare, hospitals, and insurance. And so I think this is going to lead to a really exciting conversation about focused not sort of on maybe it's too big of an idea to say how do we get fiber everywhere? Okay, but we know we have a very targeted industry focus that Connecticut has invested a lot of energy and money and thought into creating this biotech. We already have insurance, and obviously healthcare is just huge and growing. And so I think that's going to be it's going to be really exciting to be a part of that. And I don't know a whole lot about Cleveland other than what you just described, but that's the idea behind it. Is okay, let's look at our leading industries, figure out what they need, and figure out how we can potentially deliver to them with respect to IT services. And to do it, this isn't a working group that's supposed to hang around for a couple of years. We need to deliver a report to the legislature by January 15th. So we're going to write focused, targeted conversation that's going to involve all sorts of stakeholders. So I would say stay tuned, but I'm really excited about that because it literally just passed a few days ago.
Does it focus on specific development and adoption in the locale, or just as an industry statewide in general? I think one of the impediments to adoption and creating a true health tech corridor would be championing a particular geographic location, saying from this point to that point, you could find 100 gig service or 10 gig service, a true differentiator. And I guess more of what I was getting at was an organization devoted towards that regional areas of development. I don't know, Stanford or Norwalk or Hartford or New Haven have an interest in pushing forward.
Well, I think that's all part of the conversation, is what's missing? What are the pieces that we don't have that we want to start developing or formulating? And one of them may well be that we need to have the kind of organization you're talking about. Maybe that we need to create nonprofit organizations or like something similar to Genus that's focused on healthcare or data or insurance. Or maybe they already exist and they're just not talking to each other in the same way. But this is the start of that conversation, so I think it's a big step forward for the state.
I once had a commissioner ask me why we didn't put Wi-Fi in all the state buildings, because felt that access should be like water. It should be free, it should be available everywhere. But when you think about water, right, there's really large utilities beyond that sort of bring that to you. So connectivity, broadband, that kind of thing, we already have a distribution mechanism. We may not be happy with it. It may be, horses and buggies that are dragging the water out to us in many ways. But thinking about making it available free to everyone or making that high speed available is very disruptive in the market. It's something that's very different. How do you see attitudes of whether it's our municipalities, our higher education, or our citizenry changing to be able to either embrace that kind of disruption or dismiss it?
All right, I'll start. I don't want to hog the microphone, but you're just in my wheelhouse, Martin. You know that. I mean, first of all, as a public advocate, we don't believe anything should be free. Shouldn't have free electricity, shouldn't have free water. I mean, things come with costs, and we have to be responsible for the costs associated with what we create. But on the other hand, I do think we're at the point where, in a lot of people's minds, and I really saw this during the storms, that having access to your devices and having internet access is almost as important as electricity. That's why for the first time during outages, there were clusters of not just warming stations, but charging stations at Town Hall. And that's why every Home Depot within a 100-mile radius sold out of charging, those charging strips during the storms. So, okay, if we say that this is now akin to an essential service. This is a utility in a lot of people's minds. Then the next question to me is, are we, as are we as citizens getting what we want at the price that we think we should pay for it? And not everyone's going to have the same answer to that question. What I hear from many of the people that I'm, constituents I'm talking to is, I have pretty good service, and I'll say, okay, well, how's the price? Oh, wow, it's really expensive. Okay, well, is the service good? Well, geez, I get that spinning wheel of death every Sunday when I'm trying to watch Netflix, so no, maybe not. Okay, well then, how about when you call for service? Oh, that's really frustrating too. And so when you unpack all that, you say, all right, well, if we're not where we want to be, then how do we collectively decide that we're going to rethink this idea of the internet as a luxury, more of a necessity, and how do we make sure everybody has access to it? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about education today. One of the great challenges you'll hear is, particularly there's a lot of low-income areas or more rural areas where kids just don't have access to internet at home, and they can't do their homework. I was at an event in Bridgeport High, and with Senator Murphy, he said, how many kids don't have access to internet at home? And a third of the people in the room raised their hand. So, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Mark, but we all have to start thinking, if that's not acceptable to us, and the incumbent providers, they're not doing anything wrong. They don't have an obligation to build to serve everybody. But if they're not serving everybody at a price that everyone can afford at a speed that they need, then that's where I think it is the role of the people in this room to say, all right, so what are the models, how do we start to bring it, and how do we get the public to understand that this is we may be very disruptive, but it's in provision of a greater public good that we all seem to be coalescing around that idea. So, I think we do need to continue to unpack it for the public. If you're frustrated with A, then we have to get to B, and we need to collectively start a dialogue about the path to that. So, does that answer your question? Oh, good.
Just a quick thought. I think this may be an obvious statement, but broadband is a means to an end. Fiber isn't the end. It's what kind of story are you going to tell? So I was speaking with a first select man, who's female. Is that a first select woman? Yes. And she, her vision for her town was, this is, it's a quintessential New England town, but she wants to position it as, a hub for people who are working out of their home. And there's no reason why those people couldn't be working for Fortune 50 companies, running companies, starting companies, et cetera, and sort of who knew in this quiet little New England town. So she's not talking about broadband, she's talking about economic development and raising the profile of her town and increasing the quality of life. And why not in her town, right? So I think that's the kind of story that needs to be told, and that needs to happen at a local level. And I think, the vision in Simsbury where, trying to garner public input, for example, and talking about those sort of outcomes is really key. Another example in education, and we learn from our mistakes. I worked at CREC for 10 years, and CREC is very deep in terms of service provision and likes to sell its services. And so one of the approaches was, we'll think about regionalizing education and consolidating positions, and suddenly the torches and pitchforks start coming out because now you're talking about reducing jobs. So, there was a shift a few years back when we realized that maybe that wasn't going to float, where we started talking about the story we're going to tell is we're going to introduce efficiencies that put money back into the classroom. So because we trust education, what's going on in the classroom, the teachers know what they're doing, that we're going to take the money that was being wasted in operations, make it that more efficient, and put more money into direct service. So it's an example, where you could see it manifested of, because you've got broadband, you can then start looking at open education resources. You can start taking the $250 material cost per student per year, and it goes down to $50. right? So what kind of stories are you going to tell, as opposed to we need broadband and talking about gigabits and megabits? I think that tends to get lost in a lot of citizens' mindsets. But when you start to talk about saving money and cost containment and increase of services to citizens, that's where you start to get some traction. Kevin, you had your hand up now.
Tag one thing onto that. I think it makes a lot of sense to be thinking of this as a utility at this point. The network, data, and a great analogy this morning in the keynote was the fiber is now the river. We had our factories by the river originally. That's where it started. I would take that a step further and say how many factories today are still working off of the river? They're not. They don't generate their own power. It's not their core business. It's not what they're good at. So they've outsourced that to the power company. I see my line of work, if you will, in 20 years as being outsourced to this cloud location. And there is a pipe that comes in that replaces having to sit next to the river. And that is now data. We just have to think in terms of the same things we think of with the power company. That yes, if there's a branch that comes down, if we have some kind of outage, we have to have some backup strategy, whether that's generators or batteries or emergency power. It's going to be the same thing with an IT utility. It's going to be a redundant storage area network that's on site for some data to keep the mission critical stuff going. So it's going to be thinking about a school with their data utility is going to be thinking today like a hospital with its power utility. I think that's really the direction it has to come. And then really it becomes a matter of using history as a lesson. When you look at where did our own communication infrastructure come from that we have today, the Ma Bell system was very much helped along by government assistance in the beginning, and then was able to become broken into a more competitive model. And I think we're going to need that same kind of intervention today to get the infrastructure up and going, and then democratize it out as we go forward.
I have a question for Scott and Mark since I have you guys sitting here. What is the potential that you see in the future for CEN? What are some of the visions, or the vision sounds like yours, wrong word. What is the vision? What are some of the potential paths for CEN that are going to help bring about the fiber future, or address some of these needs we've been hearing about from the towns all day?
I can start, and maybe Mark can tag on or correct some of my statements. No, so really, the way we look at the CEN is as an enabler, right? So looking at some of the ideas that the towns and communities have on leveraging the network for efficiencies, we want to continue to help that, break down some of the barriers that the towns are facing. How do we leverage the infrastructure that we've built to connecting more people, to enable better access to folks? How do we strengthen the community anchors that we've built into? How do we bring the libraries up to speed and make that the hub for our community? How do we support the towns in extending that deeper into their community to meet their goals and objectives? So we want to work with all the schools and libraries and towns to further to take this and just continue to raise the bar. I don't know if that's a start to your question.
One of the things that Doug's sort of bringing to our attention is looking through the statutes that we have for the Connecticut Education Network and the Commission for Education Technology, and one of the things that we're falling a little short on is, actually says we're supposed to connect, if you read it, it says we're supposed to connect every school, every library, it says every business. It really says we're supposed to connect every business.
I don't think that we're actually going to be able to fully deliver on that, nor did I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. But I do think that we'll continue to act as that sort of interstate. You know, our focus will be on those community anchor institutions, whether they be libraries or town halls or schools or universities, where we can aggregate demand and we can continue to provide them the services that they need today and tomorrow. Like we need to be gone to the next thing by the time that the commercial carriers are catching up to where we are today, right? That's where we continue to be in investing in the network and making sure that that's available. So when people are thinking about gig connections, we're thinking about 400 gig, and when they're thinking about 100, we're thinking about terabits. So that's going to be the future because our customers demand it. We're serving those folks that are looking at high speed, high data research and needing to be able to move large amounts of data across to providers. So our first mission will be to focus there, and then continue to pick up those folks and the use cases, not just from the technology, but from creating communities around the people who are using it. So sharing the examples of success, sharing content where it is available, and making that out to folks. But I don't see ourselves as being the creator of content, but I think the facilitator and sharing of that. I was having a conversation earlier today. We as a human race have been terrible at predicting the future, right? We hold Nostradamus up there because he's the only one that has actually been able to do it very well. But so making bets too far down the road, I think, is not a great idea, considering that we're in government and we have to be very careful about how we spend our money, and that we need to be responsible to our citizens on how we do that. So making sure that directionally we're moving in the direction that we all think is important, that we're making incremental gains and adding incremental value, where we'll continue to be. I don't know if the network is going to be the one that sort of generates that disruptive force in the market, but I think that we will continue to look at every opportunity to bring incremental value to all of you, and then many of the folks who are not in the room.
Scott's got to go.
We got about 2 minutes to get background to close out. So we got about a couple of minutes. Are there any final words that from any of our panel members that you want to say or leave our audience with? No, I just really wanted to thank all 4 of you for offering up all your expertise and answering questions.